To build the tallest structure on Earth, Gustave Eiffel needed a machine that could climb faster than the tower itself could rise. So his engineers built 4 of them. Steam cranes that rode up the inside of each iron leg, running on the very rails the passenger elevators would one day use. Every stroke of a single lever raised a crane just 12 millimeters. To climb one section of the tower, 10 men worked that lever for 18 hours. And as the cranes climbed, they hauled up everything behind them. Every girder, every beam, every rivet. 300 meters of iron rose into the Paris sky this way, lifted by 4 machines that history has almost completely forgotten. This is the story of the machines that built the Eiffel Tower. Over the next half hour, we are going to follow 5 of them. We will start in a workshop on the edge of Paris, where more than 18,000 pieces of iron were cut to a tolerance thinner than a human hair. We will go down beneath the river Seine, into iron boxes filled with compressed air, where men dug in the dark. We will watch 4 separate legs climb toward a single point in the sky, guided by cranes that walked up the structure as it grew. We will stand at the moment those legs had to meet, held in the grip of presses that could lift 800 tons. And we will count the rivets, more than 2 million of them, driven one at a time by hand. Along the way, we will answer a question that almost every account of this tower gets wrong. In more than 2 years of building the most dangerous structure of its age, how many men died? The number will surprise you. But first, we have to understand why this tower should never have worked at all. In the 1880s, the tallest thing human beings had ever built was the Washington Monument, a stone obelisk that reached 169 meters. It had taken decades to finish. Gustave Eiffel proposed to nearly double that height, to 300 meters, and to do it not in stone, but in open iron latticework, in time for the World's Fair of 1889. He was given a deadline of 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days. Almost no one believed it could be done. When the design was first made public, a group of the most famous artists and writers in France signed a furious letter of protest, calling the tower a useless and monstrous thing that would disgrace the city. And the engineers had their own doubts. A tower that tall and that thin would have to stand against the wind. It would have to rest on ground that on one side was soft and soaked by the river. And every one of its thousands of parts would have to fit together with a precision that no building site of that century could manage. Which is exactly why Eiffel decided that most of the tower would not be built on the site at all. 2 miles northwest of the Champ de Mars, in the suburb of Levallois-Perret, stood the workshops of Eiffel's company. This is where the real work began, long before a single beam ever reached Paris. Inside a drawing office, roughly 50 engineers and draftsmen spent 2 years producing the plans. When they were finished, they had drawn 1,700 general drawings and 3,629 detailed ones. More than 5,000 drawings in total, and every single piece of the tower appeared on one of them, drawn to its exact size and shape, with the position of every rivet hole marked to within 1/10 of a millimeter. Think about what that means for a moment. 1/10 of a millimeter is thinner than a sheet of paper, and they were holding that tolerance across pieces of iron several meters long for a structure that would eventually stand 1/5 of a mile high. The iron itself was not steel, and it is worth being clear about that, because almost everyone gets it wrong. The tower is built from puddled wrought iron, an older material rolled at the Pompey forges in the Lorraine region of eastern France. Eiffel chose it deliberately, and he trusted it. He had spent his whole career learning how it behaved on bridges and viaducts across Europe, and he knew it would not fail him. In the workshops, the pieces were not simply cut and shipped. They were assembled first into larger sections, and then taken apart again. Holes were punched slightly undersized, and then reamed out to their final diameter with the pieces bolted together, so that when they reached the site, the holes in one beam lined up perfectly with the holes in the next. 2 out of every 3 rivets that would ever hold the tower together were driven here, in the factory, under controlled conditions. Only the last third would be driven up in the air, and there was one rule on the building site that Eiffel refused to bend. Nothing could be altered there. No piece could be filed down, bent, or drilled to make it fit. If a part arrived and did not slot into place exactly as the drawings promised, it was not forced. It was not modified. It was sent all the way back to Levallois-Perret to be remade. On a project racing against a hard deadline, that sounds close to insane. But Eiffel understood something that the artists shouting about beauty never grasped. The tower was a kit. Its strength lay in the fact that every joint was identical to the joint beside it, that nothing had been bodged or fudged in the field. Get the factory right, and the site becomes simple. Get the factory wrong, and no amount of work in Paris could ever save you. By the time the pieces began rolling out, there were 18,038 of them, each one numbered, each one with its place in the drawings, each one riding to Paris on horse-drawn carts. It was the largest and most precise piece of flat-pack engineering the world had ever seen. And now it all had to be put together, starting with a problem hidden beneath the ground. If you find this kind of engineering as fascinating as we do, take a moment to subscribe to Construction Legends. We tell these stories with the real numbers, the real names, and the real machines, the way they actually happened. Now, back to the ground beneath the tower. The Eiffel Tower stands on 4 legs, spread across a square roughly 125 meters on each side. 2 of those legs, on the side away from the river, sat on firm, dry ground. Digging their foundations was straightforward. Crews excavated down to solid clay, poured in enormous beds of concrete and stone, and moved on. But the 2 legs nearest the Seine were a different matter entirely. Here the ground was waterlogged, soft, and unstable, and the deeper the crews dug, the more the water fought back. There was no way to dig an open pit. As fast as men could shovel, the river seeped in to fill the hole. Eiffel had faced this exact problem before, and he reached for a technique he had already used on the great railway bridge at Bordeaux years earlier. The answer was the compressed air caisson. Picture an enormous iron box, open at the bottom and sealed at the top, more than 15 meters long and 6 meters wide. This box was lowered onto the riverbed ground, and then compressed air was pumped inside it, hard enough to hold back the water and push it down and out of the open bottom. Inside that pocket of pressurized air, men climbed down and dug. The mud and gravel they loosened was hauled up through airlocks, and as the ground was removed beneath it, the whole iron box sank slowly deeper, chasing solid footing. For anyone who has followed this channel for a while, this should sound familiar, and it should sound frightening. We have told the story of the Eads Bridge across the Mississippi, where men worked in exactly this kind of compressed air, and where dozens of them came out crippled or dying from a mysterious sickness nobody yet understood. They called it Caisson disease. Today, we call it decompression sickness, the same affliction that strikes divers who rise to the surface too quickly. When a man spends hours breathing air under high pressure and then returns to normal air too fast, gas bubbles form inside his blood and his joints, and the results can be agony, paralysis, or death. On the Eads Bridge, and later on the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, that sickness took a terrible toll. So the obvious question is this: did the same thing happen at the Eiffel Tower? You will find accounts, even respected ones, that claim it did, that describe Eiffel's caisson workers bleeding and struggling to breathe and suffering partial paralysis. But when we go back to Eiffel's own detailed record of the work, a very different picture emerges. His river caissons were sunk only to about 5 meters below the water level of the Seine. That is shallow. And because it was shallow, the air pressure inside was low enough that the men working in it were never in the kind of danger that killed workers on the deep American caissons. There is no record in Eiffel's own account of a single one of his men falling ill from the compressed air. The foundations on the riverside were begun at the end of April in 1887, and every one of those caissons was dug and filled with concrete within a single month. It was fast, it was controlled, and by the standards of what had come before, it was remarkably safe. There is one more detail in these foundations that most people never hear. The tower is anchored to the ground by long iron bolts set deep into the masonry, each of them nearly 8 meters long. And yet Eiffel himself wrote plainly that those bolts are not actually needed to hold the tower up. The tower is so heavy, and its weight is spread so cleverly across its 4 feet, that it stands by gravity alone. The pressure it puts on the ground beneath it is gentle, no greater than a man sitting in a chair. The bolts were there only as insurance, a margin of safety against the wind during construction. The tallest thing in the world was held down mostly by its own enormous weight. With the 4 feet finally resting on solid ground, the tower could at last begin to climb. And that is where our forgotten machines return. The 4 legs of the Eiffel Tower do not rise straight up. They lean steeply inward, curving toward each other, so that what begins as 4 separate towers at ground level must eventually converge into one. And for the first stretch of that climb, up to the level of the first platform, the legs lean so far from vertical that they cannot yet support themselves. Left alone, they would simply topple inward under their own weight. So as each leg rose, it was propped up by tall timber scaffolds, 12 of them standing around 30 meters high, and 4 larger ones reaching over 40 meters. These wooden towers held the leaning iron in place, taking the strain until the 4 legs could be joined together at the top and made to hold one another. But how do you lift thousands of tons of iron, piece by piece, higher and higher, up the inside of a leaning tower? This was the problem Eiffel's cranes were built to solve, and the solution was quietly brilliant. Each of the 4 legs was designed to carry a passenger elevator, running up the inside of the curved leg at a steep angle. Those elevator tracks would not be installed until the tower was finished. So during construction, Eiffel used the space where they would go. He mounted a crane on rails inside each leg, rails laid along the exact path the elevator would later follow, and that crane climbed the tower as the tower grew. These were not enormous machines. Each crane weighed around 15 tons and could lift about 3 tons at a time. They swung on a jib that could reach out anywhere from 5.5 to 12 meters, and they moved upward by a slow, patient, screw-driven mechanism. Here is the detail that captures the whole spirit of this build. Every single stroke of the operating lever raised the crane just 12 millimeters. 12 millimeters, about half an inch, per pull. To move a crane up one full section of the tower, a distance of 2.5 meters, took a crew of 10 men working that lever around 18 hours. and to shift the crane's rails up to the next stage entirely was a 3-day job. Think about the rhythm of that work. The crane sits at the top of the finished iron. It reaches down, picks up a beam that has just arrived from Levallois-Perret, and lifts it into position, where riveters lock it into place. It picks up the next piece, and the next, building the structure upward around and above itself. And then, when it can reach no higher, the crane slowly, painfully, climbs the iron it has just built, 12 millimeters at a time, dragging its rails up behind it, until it sits atop the new work and can begin again. 4 of these machines, 1 in each leg, crept up the tower like that for months. They were the beating heart of the whole operation. Nearly every piece of the Eiffel Tower above the foundations passed through the hook of one of these climbing cranes, and they did it in the open air, higher and higher above the rooftops of the city. The men who rode and worked these cranes were not tied to the ground by anything but their own nerve and skill. As the tower passed 100 meters, then 150, the view from the work face became something almost no living person had ever seen. Paris spread out below like a map, and still the iron climbed, and still the cranes followed it up, 12 millimeters at a time. By the middle of 1888, the 4 legs were nearing the height where they would finally have to become one. Which brings us to the single most dangerous and delicate moment in the entire construction, the moment Eiffel had been planning for from the very beginning. From the day he approved the design, Eiffel knew that the whole tower would live or die at the first platform. This is the level, 57 meters above the ground, where the 4 leaning legs are tied together by a great horizontal belt of iron and finally begin to support one another. For this to work, the top of each leg had to arrive at precisely the right height and precisely the right angle. If even one leg came in too high, too low, or leaning at the wrong pitch, the connecting girders would not meet, the holes would not line up, and there is no filing or forcing allowed. Remember, everything had to be exactly right, across gaps of more than 100 meters between the feet, at a height of 57 meters in the air. To manage this, Eiffel did something that sounds almost paradoxical. He built each leg slightly steeper than its final angle was supposed to be. He made them lean in a little too much on purpose, because he had a way to correct them, gently, at the very end. Before we reach that moment, a quick word. Documentaries like this one take days of research to get right, to separate what actually happened from the myths that have been repeated for over a century. If you would like to help us keep making them, you can support the channel with a small donation through the link in the description below. Every contribution goes straight back into the work. And now, back to those 4 legs, hanging in the air, waiting to be brought into line. Hidden inside the base of each of the 16 columns that make up the 4 legs, there was an opening built to hold a hydraulic press. Not an ordinary jack. Each of these presses could exert a force of 800 tons. By pumping them by hand, the crews could lift an entire leg by a tiny amount, just enough to slide a thin steel shim into a joint and change its angle by a hair. And alongside the presses, they used a second, even simpler tool: boxes filled with sand. A leg could be allowed to rest on a column of sand, and then, by opening a small hole and letting the sand trickle out, the crews could lower that leg with astonishing control, a fraction of a millimeter at a time. So picture the scene in the early months of 1888. 4 gigantic iron legs, each one deliberately built a touch too steep, all leaning inward toward a meeting point in the sky. And at their feet, teams of men working hand pumps and sandboxes, nudging 800 tons of iron up with the presses, easing it down with the sand. reading their measuring instruments, calling out adjustments. Slowly, patiently, they brought all 4 legs into perfect alignment, until the connecting girders of the first platform could be slid into place and the holes lined up exactly as the drawings in Levallois-Perret had always promised they would. When it was done, the accuracy they had achieved was almost hard to believe. The great iron beams of the first platform were brought level to within about 1 millimeter. The junction of the legs themselves came together within a few centimeters across those enormous spans. 4 separate towers had become one. The most feared moment of the build was behind them, and it had gone off without a hitch. It is worth pausing on how strange this must have looked from the streets of Paris. For months, Parisians had watched 4 disconnected iron legs clawing upward toward nothing, leaning drunkenly inward, apparently supporting nothing at all. To many of them, it looked like folly or madness. The newspapers of the day were merciless. One tabloid ran a story claiming that Eiffel had gone insane, that the strain of his impossible project had broken him, and that he had been shut away in an asylum. He had not. He was standing at the foot of his tower with hydraulic presses and boxes of sand, doing some of the most careful engineering work of the entire 19th century. But the story tells you just how impossible this tower looked to the people watching it rise. With the first platform locked together, the tower had its backbone. From here, it would climb faster, and the work would turn to the millions of small iron pins holding the whole thing together. We have talked a great deal about the big machines, the cranes, the presses, the caissons. But the Eiffel Tower is held together by something much smaller, repeated on a scale that is difficult to imagine. Rivets, 2.5 million of them. A rivet is a short iron pin with a head on one end. To use it, you heat it until it glows, push it through matching holes in 2 pieces of iron, and then hammer the plain end flat into a second head while it is still soft. As the rivet cools, it shrinks, pulling the 2 pieces of iron together with tremendous force. Every joint in the tower is made this way. Up on the structure, the work was done by teams of 4 men, and each man had one job. The first heated the rivets in a small portable forge, a brazier of glowing coals perched on the iron. When a rivet was white hot, he threw it, or passed it with tongs, to the second man, who caught it and pushed it through the hole. The third man held it in place from behind with a heavy iron bar bracing against it. And the fourth man, the striker, hammered the soft end again and again until it spread into a tight, permanent head. 4 men, 1 rivet at a time, hanging in the wind hundreds of feet in the air. The numbers behind this are staggering. Of the 2.5 million rivets in the tower, about 2/3 were driven back in the workshop, which leaves the rest to be done on the site. The exact figure driven up on the tower itself was 1,050,846. On an average working day, the teams drove around 1,650 of them. And in their fastest stretch, in a single week, 20 riveting teams managed to drive 22,000 rivets. Every one of those was heated, thrown, placed, held, and hammered by hand, by men standing on narrow platforms with the city far below. The rivets themselves were not ordinary iron. They were made to the same standard as the iron used in locomotive boilers, tough enough to bend cold to a sharp angle without cracking. Nothing about this tower was left to chance, right down to the smallest pin. And when you stand beneath the Eiffel Tower today and look up into that web of crisscrossing iron, remember that every place 2 beams cross. There are rivets, and that most of the ones you can see were put there by 4 men and a bucket of fire, working without a safety net, 1 glowing pin at a time. By the standards of the 19th century, Building tall meant burying men. It was simply accepted. When they built the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, the work cost more than 20 lives, and some estimates put the true number closer to 30 or 40. When they built the Forth Bridge in Scotland, a vast steel structure finished around the same time as the Eiffel Tower, the modern count of the dead stands at 73 men. Falling, drowning, crushed, struck by dropped tools, killed in the Caissons. On the great works of that age, death came with the territory. We covered one of the worst of these disasters when we told the story of the deadliest machine at Hoover Dam, where a single steel cable took lives in an instant. We are in the final stretch of this story now, and here it takes a turn that almost every telling of the Eiffel Tower gets completely wrong. If you are enjoying this, a like on the video genuinely helps us reach more people who care about how these things were really built. So stay with us, because the number of men who died building this tower has a far stranger answer than you have been told. Against that grim background, what happened at the Eiffel Tower is genuinely astonishing. Gustave Eiffel raised the tallest structure on Earth, 300 meters of open iron, across more than 2 years of work. And during the entire construction of the tower, not one worker was killed. Not one. On a build that looked, to everyone watching, like the most dangerous thing imaginable, the men came home each night. That was not an accident, and it was not luck. It was the result of a system that Eiffel built as carefully as he built the tower itself. As the work climbed higher, movable wooden floors and guardrails followed it up, so that the men were rarely working on open beams with nothing beneath them. The planks were fitted with raised edges, so that a dropped tool or a hot rivet would not simply roll off into space and onto a man below. Workers were expected to keep their tools tethered, and Eiffel took an interest in his men that was rare for a boss of that era. He set up a canteen on the first platform, once it was built, and later moved it higher, so that the men would not have to climb all the way down for their lunch and all the way back up again, losing time and tiring themselves on the ladders. He kept the prices low, subsidizing the meals himself. But the most telling thing about that canteen was what he refused to sell. Wine was a normal part of a working man's day in France at the time, on almost any building site. Eiffel would not allow the free flow of it on his. He banned the sale of strong spirits up on the tower, permitting only small, controlled amounts, because he was convinced that drink was behind most accidents on high structures. A drunk man at 300 meters is a dead man, and Eiffel knew it. Fighting or drinking on the job meant instant dismissal. He was in his own strict way, decades ahead of his time on the question of safety, at a moment when most employers simply counted the bodies and hired replacements. So how is it that this tower is sometimes said to have claimed a life? Because it did claim one, but not in the way you might think, and not during the construction we have been describing. The one man who died in connection with the Eiffel Tower was an Italian worker named Angelo Scagliotti. He was around 40 years old, an experienced iron worker who had worked for Eiffel before, on the Great Garabet Viaduct in southern France. He had worked on the tower from beginning to end, and he did not fall from the iron while building it. Scagliotti died on the 24th of May, 1889. By that date, the tower was already finished. It had been officially inaugurated back in March, and it had already opened to the public. He was killed during work on one of the elevators, the passenger lifts being installed and tested inside the legs. The elevator car struck him in the head, and he did not survive. There is a popular legend, repeated endlessly, that he died on a Sunday while showing off for his fiancée, climbing where he should not have been. That story appears to be false, a piece of romantic invention tangled up in old newspaper retellings. The truth is both more ordinary and more sobering. He was a working man, doing his job on the machinery of the finished tower, and the machinery killed him. Eiffel paid his widow a sum of money and helped arrange for the family to return to Italy. And so the record stands, technically and honestly, across the whole dangerous business of raising the iron, of the caissons and the cranes, and the millions of rivets in the open sky. No one died. The single life the tower took, it took after it was already standing. The tower was topped out and inaugurated on the 31st of March, 1889, 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days after the first shovel went into the ground, almost exactly the deadline Eiffel had been given. The lifts were not yet running, so to mark the achievement, Eiffel led a party of officials and journalists up the stairs on foot, all 1,710 of them, stopping along the way to explain his tower. At the top, he raised an enormous French flag to a booming salute of guns fired from the first platform. He had built the tallest structure in the world, and he had built it out of iron latticework that his critics had called a monstrosity. The tower cost nearly 7,800,000 francs to build, well over the original budget. The French state and the city of Paris contributed only about a fifth of that. The rest, the overwhelming majority, Gustave Eiffel put up himself. It was an enormous personal gamble. In exchange, he was granted the right to operate the tower and collect its ticket revenue for 20 years before it passed to the city. And that gamble paid off almost immediately. During the World's Fair of 1889, nearly 2 million visitors climbed the tower. In the roughly 7 weeks after it opened to the public, it took in over 1 million francs in entrance fees, a structure that much of Paris had wanted to tear down before it was even finished had, within a single summer, nearly paid for itself. There is a final twist worth telling, because it is the reason the tower is still standing at all. Eiffel's right to run the tower was only for 20 years. After that, it could have been dismantled and sold for scrap, and plenty of people would have been glad to see it go. What saved it was not its beauty, and not the ticket sales. It was the radio waves. As wireless telegraphy was born, the tower found its true purpose. Its great height made it an ideal antenna, and the French military began using it to send signals across enormous distances. By the early 1900s, it had become far too valuable as a wireless station to ever pull down. The machines had built the tower. In the end, a new kind of machine, the radio transmitter, is what saved its life. Today, the Eiffel Tower is so familiar that it is easy to forget it was ever anything but inevitable. But it was not inevitable. It was cut from more than 18,000 pieces of iron in a workshop 2 miles away, drilled to a tolerance thinner than paper. It was raised on foundations sunk into the bed of a river inside boxes of compressed air. It was lifted into the sky by 4 small steam cranes that climbed the structure 12 millimeters at a time. It was brought into alignment by presses that could push 800 tons and by boxes of trickling sand. And it was pinned together by more than 2 million rivets, most of the visible ones driven by 4 men and a fire, standing in the wind with the whole of Paris beneath their feet. That is the amazing story the postcards never tell. Not the silhouette, but the machines and the men who ran them. If you want to see how another impossible structure was raised against all odds, watch our documentary on the machines that built the Empire State Building, and you will see the same genius and the same courage at work. Thank you for watching Construction Legends. Push the subscribe button and stay with us, because there are a great many more machines and many more forgotten men still waiting to have their stories told.